Well, good morning everyone. I'm glad you could join me for this week's farming programme. Now, many of us gathered a few days ago to celebrate quite a remarkable point in time as one of the island's best known, probably longest serving field officers of the Department of Agriculture retired on his 60th birthday. I'm sure he'll not mind me telling you. Some of us have worked through the same period of time together, and it was good to meet to celebrate this gentleman's retirement. And we did gather at a function to celebrate it, where we gathered with a lot of our friends from the Department of Agriculture of former years. And I remember saying on that occasion it was as if my former life was all passing before me, as I met many of the people in my early farming career who I knew and respected very, very well. People like John Bragazzi and Mike Davis, Robert Corkish, and many, many others, Lawrence Corlett and many others, because we had gathered to celebrate the retirement of Duncan Longworth. Duncan, on your retirement, are you probably the longest serving member of the department?
No, actually Pam Neal is the longest serving. Then there was Malcolm Kelly. Malcolm started on the November before I started in the February in 68, so he must have started in November.
So you started in 1968?
Here, but I was actually, I joined the Ministry of Agriculture in 66. When I first started having interest in agriculture, there's a photograph somewhere in this house of me on top of a Clydesdale mare in Carbridge when I was probably about 1.
Right.
So I think that's where my farming interest started.
You came to the Isle of Man. You came to the
Yes.
Isle of Man in 1968. To
No, we didn't come in 68.
Oh, right.
We came in 57.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we came in 57. We came on a holiday. We stayed, I think it was Jimmy Faulkner's mother's boarding house.
Right.
On the Marine Peel. We had a holiday. The next year we came back, and I think I can remember going around there and looking at houses all the time. It was, we didn't have a holiday, but eventually we bought a house, and it was a very enjoyable house. Basically, we had a lot of fun there, and that was at Ballaghow Mansion House, next door to Ballaghow Farm.
Right.
And obviously we got to know the farmer next door, which is Edward Corlett, and I would be up there helping him out, in the holidays. And it's funny though, I was just thinking about this the other day. I actually joined the Young Farmers when I was at school.
Right.
Because I wasn't educated in the Isle of Man, I was educated in North Wales.
So you had a Young Farmers Club in your school where,
We did,
where you were
yes,
educated.
yeah.
We thought we were the first at Douglas High School because I was a founder member of the Douglas High School Young Farmers Club, but obviously you were operating in another part.
Yeah, we was. I think I must have been 12 or 13 when I was a member.
Right.
And we just had people, lecturers coming from Lavassie Farm Institute, which is one of the ones in North Wales.
So let's hop straight then to when you came as a field officer. You were obviously experienced in the work. You had some years past.
I was fully trained as a field officer, both in the subsidy work and administration. That was lime subsidies, hill cows, hill sheep, counted those, and things like that. As a pest advisory officer as well, because we had to go around the local authorities because the government gave grants for rodent and rabbit.
Where was all this taking place, Duncan?
I was trained in Preston.
Right. So let's come on to the Isle of Man, because I know you've got a super story to tell about your experiences on the Isle of Man.
Well,
so you started on the Isle of Man. Who were the people you were working with then when you came here to what would then be the Board of Agriculture?
It was the Board of Agriculture, yes, and I'm sorry, but for a long time, even after I became the department, I still refer to it as the Board of Ag.
Many of us still do.
Yeah, probably. Well, obviously, when I first came, there was Dougie Carouche and Bob Hawkins. Dougie Carouche was the chief vet. There was Pam Neal upstairs. She was Pam Cacken in those days. And Mrs. Cubban. Remember Mrs. Cubban?
Yeah.
Come down one floor, and there was Robert and myself. We were little room at the end of the corridor.
That's Robert Corkish.
Robert Corkish. Go towards the front of the building, and there was La Corlett, who was slightly under secretary for the department, and Jamison was in the front room of the boardroom.
Yeah.
And then go downstairs again, and there was Will Farragher,
Yeah.
who he was the secretary of the forestry board eventually, and then came back again as our finance officer. There was Harry Ratcliffe, and I can't remember who the girls were, but it was a small, close group of people, and we all had to, work. And
Did you all work together as a team?
we did work together as a team. If we had a problem, I can remember there was, after Dougie left, well, he had a heart attack, and he was in Nobles. And when he came out, I was volunteered to help him out, obviously do the heavy work while he did the blood testing and what have you.
Yeah.
I can remember there was a farm, I won't mention names, but there was a farm not far from Douglas, and we should have realised something was wrong because the farmer had this pitchfork, and it was basically an Ayrshire cross shorthorn, and its horns, all like these cartoon characters, they were definitely sharpened, and it could kick sideways, backwards and forwards. And it got me, hit me on the hip, and I was 10 feet down the gutter.
Oh dear.
Luckily it was that, because I think it would have killed me. If it had gone on my stomach, I would have... anyway. And then on the other side, there was a Charolais cross heifer, and that thing, well, we had a rough time, but when we got there, it got both kneecaps. So I basically said, excuse me, and I moved the farmer out of the way, wound up, and I'd be told off now if I did that, but I basically... let rip because I was so... It was, the kneecaps had been knocked over and then back again. No lasting damage, luckily.
So, Duncan, a young man coming from Preston to the Isle of Man,
Yes.
to Manx farmers who are conservative with a small c,
Yeah.
How did you begin to gain their confidence?
Good question, I don't know. I suppose I've always tried to do the job as it should be done. You get what you're entitled to and you don't get any more. And
Because I think we should explain, shouldn't we, that a lot of your work concerned approving eligibility of grant
That's right,
aid
yeah.
and also subsidy schemes that were running at that time.
that's it.
And if you turned something down, you wouldn't be very popular, would you?
No. I can remember a farmer... do you remember the car subsidies we used to do? Car subsidies, basically, for those of you who don't know, is the government gave a grant, for different rates of grant for male and female calves, and certain were eligible and certain weren't. Some weren't. We would go round, they had to be dehorned, and if they were male, they had to be castrated. And there's a higher rate for the males than the females. And of course, you had a form there with 10 positions for, so you could say 5 and 5, whatever it is. Now in England, if you'd said 5 and 5, and they found that you had, say, 4 males and 6 females, you were prosecuted. Over here, we just let it slip, and I would alter it to whatever, and you would pay that amount of money. And that way, we had no hassle, and the job was done. I can remember, actually I had forgotten this, but somebody told me a tale against myself. It must have been fairly early on. Typical cows, there was basically just the normal stalls there. Nothing to hold them, so you just wedge them into a corner, and you got into routine that, we all had our own positions to do. I used to have a boiler suit and a coat on and a belt with the tagger and the puncher there. And, basically, you had to tag them first, because if you didn't tag them and you punched them and it shot off, or the tag didn't fit, they'd never get it back for you. So you learn very quickly to tag it first. If it escaped, it came back to you. It was great. And then you obviously checked it wasn't castrated.
I think we have to remind ourselves in these days, Duncan, that you were operating in the days before there were adequate handling facilities.
Yes.
It was usually a bunch of cattle behind a gate or in a corner somewhere.
Yep.
Maybe 2 of you to do it all. Maybe you done some on your own. I don't know.
Yeah, I quite a few times. if they weren't able, if a lady was left to deal with me, you just basically had to wedge them in a corner, do as best you could, and right, I've done so much. You happy? Yeah, right, okay.
Did you always succeed, or were there some that you just had to walk away from?
No, I think it's we usually survived in the it would be sheer determination would probably get it done. I mean, you even though I'm fairly small, you knew these obviously, up to maybe 40 months of age or something like that. So there were certain ways. You just get wedges, gates and wedge and bales, anything like that to try and
Now,
drive them in and then deal with them.
now that was the stock. What about the farmers you met then? Because you were going to meet a whole new race of people when you came into
Well,
this situation. Did you get good cooperation, or what was the situation?
I can't remember. I can only remember one person basically throwing me off a farm because
Oh, dear.
I'd actually gone along and discovered that the first animal it was like 50 months of age and it had large things that dangle. We won't, because maybe ladies listening. So, and then the next one had the same, they had been castrated. So I said, that's it, I'm just going. Get off, never you come back.
Oh
and
dear.
don't get the other side of the.
Because that meant he got no payment, didn't
Of
it?
course it did.
Oh, dear.
So luckily, I knew there was a phone about 200 yards down the road, so I belted down and rang, got me 4 pennies worth and put it in the phone box and got through to Dougie Cruise because he was the appeals judge. And rang him and told him what had happened. It's all right. The farmer got on the phone, different story altogether. So yes, that was one of those things.
Yeah, but they were difficult days. But I don't doubt you enjoyed your work, though, Duncan. Otherwise, you would never have stuck it.
No, I think that's true. I mean, basically, you had a job to do. You did it as best you could. Obviously, sometimes the facilities weren't always good. I'm just writing notes here, and I was just thinking, there was one time I went to a farm, I think I had flu, but if I said I was going to go somewhere, I always turned up. And you've told me tales about myself about the same thing. And I think I had flu. It was a June day, belting hot. I was in a black barn, and of course I had the boiler suit and the coat on, and I was swaying, and they said, "You don't look well, come into the kitchen and have a whiskey." I said, no, that could be construed as a bribe, and we carried on. I didn't pass out, but I think I was very close to.
What about the hospitality on farms then? You must have spent quite a bit of time in farm kitchens because, as we've said on this programme many times before, that's really where it all happens, isn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, it happens now. You go to the farm, and they say, well, come in and have a cup of tea, and they put the kettle on, and you start discussing what you're going to see or whatever it is. You go out and do it, and then you come back and you either start doing the calculations or you get him to fill in the right forms or whatever it is. Now, on the second cup of tea, he's actually thought of the questions he'd remembered 2 or 3 weeks prior to that. And that way, I'm told by my managers that really, you come back another time. No, it's a waste of time. If you're there, do the job. It is right. Calf substitutes. Have you got 5 minutes? I've got a couple of calves down the field here. Can you bring them up and do them? You knew your dinner had gone out the window. You had no time. You're going to be late for the rest of the day, but you did them because it saved you another trip.
Yeah,
and we were always
yeah.
trying to cut corners to get the job done because we never had enough staff. That was the trouble.
That didn't just help the board or the department, Duncan. It also helped the farmer as well. And I've heard of stories that have been told about some of your exploits. Hours didn't seem to matter to you, Duncan. If you were committed to a job, you would do the job, and that was all that was taught.
Well, yes, I get told off. You have to have permission. If you start doing overtime, you must have permission before you start. Otherwise, you're not going to get paid. But you didn't worry. I mean, I was talking to Richard Osborne some weeks ago now, and when Chernobyl happened, we just set to and did it. It was a natural disaster. We just had to do it. Yeah. We didn't worry about overtime. We had to try and save the industry because straight away people weren't going to buy any lamb. And of course, that's your main enterprise.
I can remember, and I'll tell you the story. I'll repeat the story for listeners. Maybe you're too modest to tell it, Duncan, but it was told to me on very, very good authority about when you used to go around and count the hill cows. Because hill cows are eligible for
quite a high payment.
Quite a high payment, they are. And of course, the number that a farmer applies for has to be established and verified. It was a very dark, cold, wet November afternoon when you went to a hill farm in the west of the island, and the farmer pointed up on the hill and said, "They're up there," and I don't know how many, there may have been 50, perhaps, I don't know how many.
36.
Whatever it was, you remember the story, Duncan. But anyway, the farmer sent you off, and much, much later that evening, it could have been 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. It was completely dark. and you were observed coming back off the hill.
There's one thing you have failed to tell us, isn't there?
Go on.
What was happening?
I've no idea.
It was snowing.
Was it as well?
I went up in a blizzard, I think.
But actually, you couldn't find the number of cows that you'd been told. You were short 2. And instead of coming back and just writing on the number that you had found, you walked back and forward along the hill until it was too dark to see, but eventually you found the 2 cows that were missing.
That's right. A far gully at the far end of the farm, and I always found them at the same place every year. Because when I first started, I think there was 12 hill farms, and you knew roughly where the cows were. They were in different groups, and obviously went round every year. Lark Audit had said you inspect every cow, so you had to go and see every cow. Now, I've always, like another story, I was always, when I've gone there, not only am I counting the cows, but I'm looking at the condition of the cows. And as the seasons obviously move through, from November, December, maybe into January, obviously the condition of the cows go down. So I'm taking the average, and if they're below what I consider good, then in those days, long before we have what we have now, they would get a warning. And if they didn't, I'd say, right, I'll come back at the end of March. Now he's going to miss his payment, but I'd say I'll come back at the end of March, and if they haven't improved, I'm not going to pay you. And inevitably, when you come back at the end of March, different lot of cows. They'd actually improved. He decided to feed them properly. And it was my own little way. We got a lot of cooperation. Didn't have to prosecute them. No. They just followed the proper rules, and that was it.
Did you reckon then, and did you actually work for a sort of an interface with the farmers? Did you look for a relationship that encouraged them to do the things you require doing?
Well, yes. One of the reasons why I left the ministry is that obviously you said, and other people have said, I always looked very young for my age. And it was obviously, if you're a safety inspector, you go on there and you've got problems, somebody's broken the law or could be in serious breach of something like that, then you've got the problem that you've got to take them to court. That's going to be an awful lot of paperwork, and it's going to cost an awful lot of money. And on the safety course, when I was on my safety course down in Ely, there was a gentleman down there who eventually became a principal safety inspector for HSE. But unfortunately, he prosecuted the same farmer for the same offence 3 times. Now, that told me a long time ago, you've got to persuade people to get down the right road rather than prosecute them, because they won't learn. But if you can persuade them, turn them, and you've obviously talked to many people, but I like to think I've got people out of a sticky hole. I can think of somebody now. Persuasion, and we didn't prosecute him, somebody else did, and he's never forgiven those people for doing it. But we sorted him out, and he was thankful in the end, because it meant that he didn't lose the sale that day, and he did comply with the law in the end.
And when we're talking about cooperation between officials, as you were, a field officer, and farmers who are very pragmatic, have to get on with the job and do the work, you can be worlds apart. But I can remember you coming round, and I think you've even been in our kitchen, Duncan, and I'm not afraid to tell anybody this. You would say, why isn't your claim form in? Get it out here now, and you would fill it in.
Or go and get one from the car, I've got some spare.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you'd turn it around to me, sign it, and it was all done with. And that was very, very helpful. We weren't always sure what was eligible, what we should be claiming for. You could sort it out there and then. And we found that a very, very helpful service indeed. And I think those sort of things helped to build the relationship that I think you at this stage and in latter years enjoyed in the work that you were doing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I try and get people to think, if they're going to put a barn up, and really Robert Corkish was the instigator here. He said, don't put the barn there. If you put it X number of feet away, then if you want, you can put a lean-to there, because we know, and you know, you're going to put a barn up, but it's never big enough. Why didn't I put an extra? And if you'd only put the barn up with the lean-to at the same time, but no, we'll leave it a couple of years, and by the time we put the lean-to on, the cost of the lean-to is more than what the barn cost. Yes?
It is
indeed. It is, it's true. So we try, or at least try and envisage what you want to end up with, because if you don't, then you're going to run out of room, and you can't get the tractors round, and let's face it, nowadays, I mean, I'm seeing trailers on farms which are ginormous. I mean, they're bigger than this room. But at one time, you had a little tiny, like 4 tea chests screwed together. And now they're 30 feet long, aren't they? And that's a proper farm trailer. Not that, I don't mean a lorry trailer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Duncan, you mentioned right at the beginning of this discussion that we're having your association with the young farmers. That was to mature, I think is the proper word to use, because you became very, very deeply involved in the Manx Young Farmers movement. And you trained the fencing teams and took them to compete in national competitions with a good deal of success, Duncan.
Yes, I'm afraid we have. We've come first, we've come last. We've come first, and they've put us fourth, so we didn't win any money because somebody didn't tie off. The wire. It was actually stapled, but it wouldn't have gone. But anyway, but when it all started, it actually started. I was the agricultural safety inspector for the island, and I thought, well, one way to try and get people interested in farm safety is we would have the fishery safety competition. It started with people like Henry Watterson, Colin Duggan, and Willie Gelling, and we went away to Bedale, and the idiot before Colin, he had to put a header on a combine and then do 1 or 2 things with it, adjust it, and he'd driven over it, and he spent over about an hour trying to fix this, and the examiner, or the judge, was amazed what Colin could do with a mangled mess we had left. And either next year or the year after, when we went away, there was obviously an entourage went with us, and they decided, let's go and try and do the fencing. There was a fencing competition there, and it really all started from then. I don't know when it was now, but I would say the very early 80s, 81 or 82. I've probably lost my records. But that's where it started, and from then we've just gone on and gone on. And I can remember JB, we used to practice in the bull field at Knockalo, and there was lots of little holes, and there was bull, there was something going to break a leg, and we'd go along a trailload of soil and fill these holes in afterwards.
Where you'd knock
and
this
about
post
2
in.
months, and 2 months later, this soil all appeared again, and you'd actually dig a hole out, put the string post in, and then put the soil back, and you'd end up, you were still short of soil, and when you pulled it out, where's it gone? And it would disappear yet again. So they must have really. And
but Duncan, I think it's fair to say that you trained a whole generation of young farmers to fence well, and I'll say it now. I think your influence on those young farmers revolutionised almost fencing in the Isle of Man. It from that time on, fencing took on a new standard, which we all use now and all practice. And some of us weren't even near your course, but your influence came through the industry, mainly through the young farmers. And there are contractors now who go around the island doing professional work. And I think it all began with your training and those trips to the Royal Show.
That's true. Well, Royal Show and Northern Area. And even some of the farmers have had to kind of rap on the knuckles. Don't put the staples vertical, put them sideways so when it dries out, they don't ping back out again. Yes?
Indeed. I had that comment the last fence you approved for
Yes.
me, Duncan. Duncan, you've come through 30-odd years of work on the Isle of Man. You've described those early days in the Board of Agriculture and the people you worked with. You must have observed the change that's taken place in Manx farming through those years. What's the most remarkable change, do you think, that's taken place in that time?
I think actually you asked me this question before and I haven't prepared for it. When I first started working on farms over here, we had basically maybe a farmer with maybe a dozen cows. He would rear those calves. He'd maybe have 20, 30 sheep. He was very much a mixed farmer. He'd grow enough cereals to feed those animals, etc. And then obviously they'd decided they had milking kegs, and you'd have to and a vacuum line, and then they put a glass line in. Then it would be in-churn coolers, and gradually went on to a tanker. Well, we're getting a few more cows, we'd obviously have to pay for these, so they'd end up by putting a silage pit in. That's the thing. We had early 70s, we had a lot of wet summers, and we could never make any hay. And people went on to silage, and some of them were very successful. Well, obviously you've paid for the barn with the silage, John Harris and Robert Hawkshaw would turn around and say, well, put your lean-to there. You can, if it's 22 foot wide, you can have a row either side of cubicles. So straight away, your numbers have gone up to 50, 60, 70, 80. And gradually, the old cow house that had been the original place where they were milked got converted into the parlour. And I like to think I've helped a few people that way and suggested areas and how they could do it. Some people are far better than me to do this, but, you know, we've nudged them in the right direction, and let's hope it's and we've got some very, very successful dairy farmers over here now. And the same with the sheep men and the beef. You know, over the time, you give me a problem and I'll give you an answer. And I said that once in an interview with, you know, I don't know if it was being promoted or something like that, but I don't go and spiel. You give me a problem, and within about 5 minutes, we've found the answer. Again, talking to the farmer over a cup of tea, find out what his interests are, and then you slot it round so that he will do it and it will be done right. But it's no use if you try to persuade somebody and he's not interested and it doesn't work and he blames everybody but himself.
So Duncan, you've retired now, and I don't know who your successor might be. What advice? You've had 30 years in this
35 years here, and
yeah,
but also I was working for another 5 years before then.
But a long time in this area that wasn't a particularly easy area to work in. You had to gain the confidence of the Manx farming community, and that you have done, I can assure you. What advice would you give somebody following now, maybe starting out, as you started all those years ago?
Well, I've always been my own man, I think, really. I mean, I have got into a lot of trouble over the years. I've tried to be as honest as I can. If you want an answer, I will give you what I can. Obviously, sometimes I'm covered by the Official Secret Right. And as you know, I will never tell you people's names. I will tell you as a farm in the west or the north or whatever it is. Unless, of course, I want you to go and see some of his cattle handling system, and go and see them, and you know, get the farmer's permission first, and then obviously it all works. But usually, if they said, Duncan says, "Can I come?" there's no problem. And I know I've heard of people have said, you know, this is a poor fence somebody's put up. Then, oh well, it was on Duncan's advice. End of story. They don't seem to argue. When I actually started to stock judging, working for the department, it was me who said no, because I might win or lose that competition today, and the person I was competing against would be my client the next day, and I had the upper hand. I said, that's not fair. So I very quickly backed out of that one. And I think trying to help the young farmers has given me a better relationship with the parents, the farmers themselves, and their children eventually.
Duncan, you may have retired from your official job, but you're still going to be with us on the Isle of Man.
Of course.
Can I express the hope that you will continue to circulate in agricultural circuits, which has been your life, really?
Oh, it has. I'm told I'm a workaholic.
Well, I do hope you will, Duncan, and continue to be one of us in the farming world on the island. And as you know, you must know as well as any of us, we face difficult times ahead. And we'll need to talk to people. And, I think it'll be good if people like you are still around that we can talk things over with. But, Duncan, we've come now to the end of this time together. Could I, on behalf of the farming community of the Isle of Man, say thank you very much for all that you've been for us, all the help you've given us, all the ways in which we've been able to discuss problems with you, and could I, on your retirement, wish you a long, long, happy retirement, yourself and Elizabeth, a long, happy retirement and many, many happy years together.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
There we are, ladies and gentlemen. That was Duncan Longworth, retired this week from his job as a field officer with the Department of Agriculture. And indeed, we all do wish him well in his retirement. That's all we have this week, and it's John Kennaugh signing off until next week's programme.